have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that threatens our freedoms each and every day. And it's something that I believe strongly about. I believe that our freedoms rest upon us being people of great character, because people of good character build great societies, and the foundation of that, of course, is at the individual and family level. When we're good folks and we take our responsibilities seriously and we nurture character in our young folks by building healthy relationships, healthy, committed relationships, we build great societies. And even though there have been times in our history when we have not lived up to our best ideals, some pretty dark times, in fact, where we were not very great as a nation, we have had some shining times as well. And it has been in those times where we have found our character. And I've devoted the last 25 years or so of my professional practice as a therapist, helping people develop that character that is so essential to building our society, to making the foundations of our society strong, and to ensure the freedoms that we enjoy will be with us for a long time to come. And if you want to join the conversation, the number to call is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Happy to take your call. If you have a question you want to ask, if you want to share some information or share a story, feel free to contribute. I'd be happy to take your call. I have some interesting articles posted online this week at both the www.counselingwith2lsresource.com blog and my own personal blog at www.manipulative-people.com. The series that I've just completed on the Manipulative People blog is about bearing the burden of responsible living. You know, people of good character know that taking their responsibilities seriously and doing their part to build a strong family and to build a strong society takes work. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of self-sacrifice. And folks of healthy character don't approach that responsibility with such dread or with such animosity. Rather, they realize that that's what it takes, and they embrace that responsibility freely. They might whine and complain from time to time under the yoke of it. And frankly, I don't blame them, because we have this trend in our society, this unfortunate trend, whereby we have increasingly burdened the responsible folks among us to bear more and more of the load, more than their fair share of the load. Whereas those of us, those among us who are inclined to shirk their responsibilities are unfortunately burdened with less and less of the load. This burden shifting that we've experienced in the last 20 or 30 years or so, it really cannot continue. We cannot continue to burden the responsible folks among us with more and more responsibilities and allow those irresponsible folks among us to shirk theirs, enable them, as it were, to shirk theirs. If this continues, what will happen is eventually there'll be no incentive for those among us who are kind of on the fence about embracing the burden that it is to lead a responsible life. There'll be no incentive to take up that burden. And so the ranks of the irresponsible will grow, and the ranks of the responsible will shrink. It's already happening. This is a phenomenon that is already occurring. And the consequences are just too drastic and too dire to allow them to continue. So we all need to do our part, basically to hold ourselves and one another, most especially one another, accountable again. As a dear friend of mine is wont to say, we need to make character cool again. We have to talk about it in those ways. We have to promote it. And so I do my best to do that. I've been a therapist for many years, and I've devoted my life to helping people develop the kind of character that will allow them to function in more responsible ways. Really, my work has been devoted into two different areas. One has been to deal with the victims of character disturbance, those folks who have been in relationships with irresponsible characters who have felt the brunt of their partner's irresponsibility and have tried to get help in so many ways over the years, only to find that traditional modes of counseling don't help when it comes to people of irresponsible character. Therapy, as it was initially designed, was never designed to help folks of irresponsible character. It was meant to help those folks who were so overly conscientious and so overly quote-unquote neurotic, so overly anxious and hung up and distressed by their own anxieties and fears and insecurities. Traditional therapy was meant to help support and guide these folks to a better place where they could be free of these excessive concerns and anxieties. It was never, ever designed to help folks of irresponsible character develop some integrity of character. So I had to learn very early on how to basically do an entirely different kind of work, because, as you know, it's just common in society for today for folks to to recognize folks of impaired character and to recognize that they're dysfunctional and to say basically to these folks, well, you need therapy. Well, frankly, therapy was never designed to really help these kinds of folks gain character. That's not what it was designed for. And so even though we recognize that folks who are dysfunctional need quote unquote help, it's been a long while before we came up with the kinds of methods that would actually help nurture folks towards some kind of health. Folks who were basically dysfunctional in character and needed to have some character building exercises. We've just come up with ways to do that. Only recently, in the last several years, and primarily because we had to, because our methods were obsolete. They weren't fitting the needs of the times. And so that's what I've spent my lifetime doing, and I've also done a lot of writing about it, and a lot of blogging about it. I have hundreds of articles for you to read online at www.manipulative-people.com. Whether you're a person who is laboring under the weight of dealing with an irresponsible character in your life, or whether you're a person who has been pretty irresponsible and you know it and you're finally tired of that. Maybe life has taught you a few hard lessons and you're really wanting to get your act together, so to speak. There's help and there's resources for you. And you can learn all about it by visiting my blog at manipulative-people.com, and also the counseling resource, counseling with 2 L's, resource.com blog. And by accessing, of course, my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, the international bestseller. Been a bestseller now for going on 19 years in print, a phenomenal shelf life, primarily because of the timelessness of the issue, and because it's still the go-to book out there. It's still the definitive work on the subject. And also my book, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, which is an in-depth study of all the various types of character disturbances and what it is about our society that promotes these disturbances and what we need to do about it, how we build character in our children, and especially how we actually go about getting help for those folks who need assistance in developing better character so that they can function more responsibly in life. And then I also have my book, The Judas Syndrome, which is written for the Christian faith community. And I have an announcement with regard to that. I got an announcement from my publisher, Abingdon Press, part of the UMP publishing system. I got an announcement from them just a few weeks ago that we are now published in the Korean language. So now the Christian community in South Korea, of course, you know, in the north, you can be persecuted, very seriously persecuted, for even bringing any type of religion into the equation, or especially for espousing the Christian faith. But in the more prosperous South, and of course there are a lot of reasons why the South is much more prosperous, part of that having to do with the foundations of the society and their embrace of some principles that the North has not seemed to want to embrace for too many years. But the Christian faith is thriving. in the South, and now there's a Korean edition of the Judas Syndrome. So I'm real proud of that. And also for the Asian community, for the Korean community in the U.S., the book is available in that language in the U.S. as well. So I'm real happy about that. I'm proud. I'd like to see even more distribution. It kind of does my heart good because all of my books enjoy the success that they do, primarily of word of mouth, and a word of thanks to every one of you who has spread the word. Basically, long ago, I learned that there was no need for any of the high-profile kinds of promotion that I did many years ago when I first came on the scene as an author. Had to have some exposure. Had to have the PR people, so to speak. I never really enjoyed that kind of thing, but you got to get your name out there, stuff like that. I did that for a while, but it is much more edifying to have folks who resonate with your work recommend your work to other people. Word of mouth is the best advertising in the world. And the reason why my work is going 19 years later as strong as ever is because people tell other people. And as more and more people discover in sheep's clothing, as more and more people discover character disturbance, and I'm now proud to say as more and more people have discovered the Judas Syndrome, having it speak to them as I'm trying to carry a message, a certain kind of message to individuals who profess the Christian faith. As more and more people resonate with the message that I try to carry in that book and are affected by it and then recommend it to others, I couldn't be possibly any more edified. So if you're one of those persons who has helped the Judas Syndrome find a wider audience and even be translated into other languages, I thank you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I thank all of you who listen and all of you who support my work. I couldn't carry on really without your support, and I appreciate it more than you know. And if you want to be part of the discussion tonight, we're going to be talking about the series that I've just concluded on the blog. And also we're going to be talking a lot about intimate relationships and what's necessary to make them healthy, and what's also really necessary when you seek help to help enrich and restore relationships that are in maybe some hard times or some rocky times. We're going to be talking about that tonight. And if you want to join the discussion, if you have a question you want to ask, maybe you're in a relationship where you're experiencing some difficulty. Maybe you have some questions to ask about it. Maybe you're seeking some advice. Maybe you just want to share a story. Please give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296, and I'm happy to take your call. Well, the series that I've just wrapped up on the manipulative-people.com blog has to do with bearing the responsibilities of everyday life. And you know, when it comes to character disturbance, there are basically two kinds of disturbed characters, two main varieties of impaired characters who approach this whole social responsibility thing with two very different problematic outlooks. We have those narcissistic folks, and I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with the term narcissism. Now, there's a lot of people talking about narcissism because, after all, this is the narcissistic age. It has been for about the last 30 or 40 years. We are right smack dab in the midst of a narcissistic era and culture. And what fuels the age of narcissism is an atmosphere of both permissiveness and entitlement. Those are the two ingredients that you need to foster narcissism. There's nothing like a sense of entitlement to countermand the call toward responsible living. It works this way, folks, and it's very essential. And I speak to this issue in all three of my books, but most especially in Character Disturbance and in the Judas Syndrome. When you approach life and its responsibilities from a framework of being owed something, that you're entitled to things, it is really hard to have a sense of obligation. It is really hard to feel like you owe anything when in fact your main mindset is that you're owed everything by everyone else. Excuse me, the two attitudes are not compatible. Rather, you develop a sense of obligation when you feel grateful for everything that you have and you feel entitled to nothing. When you realize that everything is a gift. Every breath that you draw is a blessing. For those of you who practice some faith of some kind, you know what I'm talking about. When you approach life with a certain amount of reverence for its very existence, and when you feel truly blessed and fortunate, even to be alive and breathing, and to have the things that you have, as opposed to feeling owed everything, you have a whole different outlook on things. It begets in you a sense of obligation, a sense that I need to give something back, that I need to use my talents, my abilities, my good fortune, all my personal resources, and put my energy and my strength and my commitment toward this enterprise we call life and fostering it. And when I do that, I don't just prosper, we all prosper. When I selfishly think, what can I take? What do I feel owed? What can I grab? I actually do suffer. I know it doesn't seem that way, but I suffer in so many ways when I approach life that way. Not to mention the fact that on a spiritual level, it invites real death to the human spirit. It's a real death of soul. It's just one of the many issues that I speak to in the Judas Syndrome. But when I approach life with a reverence for it, and with a sense of awe and wonder about what this is all about, and what an absolute miracle this whole thing is, it begets in me a sense of real obligation that I owe. It's not that I am owed. my whole outlook changes from I am owed and I'm going to take what I can to I am blessed and therefore I owe. And that's when we're inclined to pick up those burdens. Now, I know that picking up the burdens of responsible living is hard work. And there are two ways to pick up this burden. One is with a fair degree of resentment, whereby we whine and complain the whole time. You know, life is hard, and we begrudgingly accept our responsibilities, and we begrudgingly do what we feel obliged to do, and then we really complain and whine and moan and groan about it, to where everybody knows about it, including our relationship partner, and it really makes life miserable. You know, everybody around us gets miserable. Plus, we're miserable. But when we accept that burden lovingly, and here's the key, freely, truly freely, you know, because we don't have to. We could be like those irresponsible characters who just say the heck with it. Let everybody else bear the burden. I'm abdicating all responsibility. And believe me, we have all too many of those folks out there. But when we freely and lovingly embrace those burdens, it gets easier. It gets a lot easier. We accept those burdens with a little bit of joy. And the more we do it, the greater our joy becomes. We begin to realize the fruits of our efforts. I've had the great fortune over the past year to be involved in a Christian-based marriage enrichment program, whereby I have met couple after couple after couple, who have really come to appreciate the sanctity of a truly sacramental marriage, where it's not just a practical partnership, but a real union of two spirits, mutually dedicated to one another's spiritual health, growth, development, and happiness. And I have met these incredible couples. The energy just fills the room. To see the power of genuine love and regard at work. And in these relationships, there is so little room for that narcissistic ego. It is so refreshing. It is so refreshing to step out of our predominantly narcissistic culture and age and atmosphere and into the realm of mutual regard that these loving couples seem to have for one another. It is so refreshing and so soul refreshing. I come out of it so energized. It's really incredible. And so even though now I have been working within this enterprise for a little over a year, and it's been a lot of work, frankly, and it's taken some time, it hasn't felt like work at all. because it's a true labor of love. I'm not sure who said it, but I'm sure you've heard the phrase, if you're doing what you love, you never work a day in your life. It's really true. You find a passion and it's just like not working. And that's what this marriage encounter has been like. And I am so privileged to have been a part of it. Maybe somebody out there has experienced this very thing. Maybe you've been through some kind of marriage enrichment. If you have and you have something you want to share about that, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Or maybe you're in one of those relationships where, unfortunately, that narcissistic ego has been involved, and unfortunately, there isn't the commitment to labor in love. And as a result, there's bitterness and unhappiness in your relationship. Maybe that's the case. Maybe you have a question you want to ask about that. Maybe you've been seeking help and you haven't been able to find the right kind of help. Or maybe you just want some advice. And if that's the case, give me a call too at 718-717-8296. I mentioned before that narcissism and narcissistic type personalities are one problematic character type that comes to the table of accepting responsibilities in life with an attitude that just doesn't work, because they feel that they're owed everything. Narcissists do, and therefore they don't feel obliged to give anything. They feel entitled. They've been so affected by this culture of entitlement that they've kind of bought into the entitlement age. But that's one stumbling block. That's one type of character that really comes unprepared to be responsible when it comes to the conduct of their relationships and their engagements, even in their work. But there's another type of individual that goes beyond narcissism. It's more than just an attitude. There are individuals who go way beyond just an attitude of entitlement and feeling that they are owed when it comes to their responsibilities, and therefore they don't feel obliged to tend to those responsibilities. Rather, there are some folks who are adverse, who pit themselves against. They're basically at war with the demands that they know that others would place upon them. They are the unscrupulous fighters among us who are contrary by nature. They hate to subjugate themselves. It's abhorrent to them. I talk about this so much in both my books, In Sheep's Clothing and in Character Disturbance. I don't talk about it in so much detail in the Judas Syndrome, although I do give examples of it. But there's a difference between just feeling so owed that you don't want to feel obliged, or that you don't feel obliged to do your part. There's a difference between that and really harboring resentment, a loathing of accepting any responsibility. And those individuals that I call in my books the aggressive personalities, some of which have been called the more antisocial types or the disocial types or the more sociopathic, even psychopathic types. At the core with these folks, what's wrong with them is that they know what society expects. They know what their partners expect. They know the obligations that others expect that they will embrace. But they're against it. They are against it with all their being. Sometimes it's primarily because they just don't feel they should have to. There's that narcissism again. Sometimes they feel that they're above the need. But usually it goes way beyond that. Usually it goes beyond that to a kind of innate abhorrence of any kind of behavior whereby they have to subjugate themselves to any higher power or authority. They're basically at war with anybody or anything that would impose an expectation upon them. They don't want to have to answer to anybody or anything. They want to set all the rules, call all the shots. And they don't want to feel that they have to submit. There's the key word right there. Any type of submission behavior innately is abhorrent to these people. They're against it. And they fight and resist it very actively. And in our country, right now, and this is why I talk and talk and talk about, excuse me, the zeitgeist of our times and the problems that it's caused. But our culture of permissiveness and entitlement has fostered such an explosion of narcissism and such an explosion of these more antisocial personality types that in our great and wonderful country, we have a higher percentage of our population so dysfunctional, so unwilling to submit themselves or subordinate themselves to the basic rules. We have a higher proportion of them incarcerated than any other free society on earth, and by a long measure, by a wide measure. And the truth is that the numbers don't tell the whole story, because our system is so overtaxed right now. We can't hold all the people that rightfully could go into the system who are that dysfunctional. Now, not all are violent to the point where they have to be incarcerated just so that society is basically safe. But they are at least dysfunctional. In other words, they're not doing their part to make the system work. They're not working. You know, it's very interesting. When I was working on both character disturbance and the Judas syndrome, I was reviewing case history after case history, and especially going through the case histories of a lot of the most dysfunctional characters among us. And I was realizing two flaws in some of the traditional thinking about these antisocial personality types. We had long thought in the psychology field, we had long thought that one of the key problems that these folks had was that they could not delay gratification. In other words, that they couldn't basically wait. They couldn't be patient. They couldn't accept a later reward, and therefore they engaged in a lot of behaviors where they got instant relief and forsook the long-term reward to their detriment. And what I realized in looking at case after case after case is that actually that wasn't always true. That a lot of the time, even the most ardent criminals among us actually could delay. They could be very patient. For example, when they were planning some illegal caper, maybe they were going to rob a bank. Maybe they were going to set up some kind of confidence scheme. Maybe they were going to set up some kind of sham enterprise, some shady business deal, land deal, auto deal, whatever the case may be. They might be very patient, carefully laying traps, not willing to go for the jugular, so to speak, right away with the mark they had in mind, with the victim they had in mind. And sometimes working very, very hard to set things up. If they were running, for example, a chop shop operation and carjacking for a living, pretty tough work, manual labor involved. Had to work quick, had to work very quickly, get those wheels off fast, had to invest in equipment, all kinds of things. Sometimes even illegal enterprises are very hard work. So I realized early on in doing case review after case review that it wasn't about an inability to delay gratification, because they actually could do that. And it wasn't really about a resentment for work in general, because actually some of these folks worked very hard. But they didn't want to do the kind of work that most of us wished they would be willing to do, which is to work on someone else's behalf as well as their own. It's those labors of love that they weren't capable of. And that's where the heart of it is. That's where the heart of it is. And this is one of the reasons I was inspired to write the Judas Syndrome. Because supposedly as Christians we believe that that's always ultimately the answer. That the answer lies in love and in fostering its development, in carrying the message. So hard to do. I went to a very inspiring workshop. Very inspiring workshop. And I know this is probably going to get some reaction here by saying this, because perhaps folks will read into this far more than is intended. But the workshop presenter are very engaging. If anyone out there ever gets a chance to hear a Christian motivational speaker by the name of Matthew Kelly. Hear him. He'll set you on end. But he provocatively asked how many had prayed for Osama bin Laden. And that kind of took the crowd by surprise. You could feel this hush all over the audience. But you know, Christians purportedly believe that love is ultimately the answer. Now, I know right away some folks are saying, well, don't you have a right to protect yourself? Yes, you do. Do you just let yourself be killed? No, you don't. Do you not have the right and the responsibility to take action to protect the brutalization of innocent folks? Yes, you do. But ultimately, the triumph over evil does not come through might. Ultimately. I am not saying that there isn't a time when unfortunately you have to use it. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that ultimately, that's not the ultimate way you defeat evil. And I think about the classic examples of that in history. You know, it's the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma. Bloody Sunday. I remember very well, 1965. I was in high school. I had just turned 17. It was my senior year. And a kind of renegade priest in our parish, a wonderful man, a saint. I consider him a saint. Was planning to go, and he was taking some folks, some younger folks, but they had to be legal adults, and I was not yet. He was taking some legal adults with him down to March. And so I didn't go. I was really torn. Thought about sneaking away. I didn't. But it must have been quite some experience. But there are some times that by just displaying the kind of loving behavior and for standing up and not being willing to kill, but rather being willing to die, that you have the power to transform the world, to change hearts and minds. And that's what began there. And very interestingly, when I first published In Sheep's Clothing, and I was first beginning some promotional tours, some book signings, one of the first out-of-state workshops I did, I was invited by the library system in Selma, Alabama, to come and do a workshop. And it was actually one of the larger workshops that I had done to date. A wonderful turnout. And I got a chance to go during the weekend that I was there, and walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and to retrace the steps. And I contemplated during that time. I didn't have the chance to go down, in 1965. Probably a good thing. I think my parents might have had a real problem, especially if I had ended up, well, either seriously injured or in jail, which would have been a high probability. Um, but I got a chance to ponder the efforts of that one person who galvanized like minds, and the power of that love. The power of that love so strong that it was willing to bear that burden. There it is once again, bearing that burden of doing the responsible thing, no matter what the consequence, no matter what the cost. That's what defines it. And that's how we ultimately change the world. First, we change our own hearts. We become willing in our gratitude, in our reverence for the sanctity of this miracle that we call life. We become willing to do our part to help it thrive. We set ourselves aside. We stop thinking in terms of what do I do to enrich myself, about what do I take, what am I owed, how much can I get. We stop thinking in those terms. And we start thinking in terms of being a partner in this process of prospering the human race. And it changes everything. It changes us for the better. It changes us for the better. And for those of you out there who profess at least the Christian faith, that's what we're charged to do. We're not charged to have the emotion of love. We are charged to love. Not only that, we are charged to love with the same level of commitment and determination and strength with which we were shown love by the very model of love that we proclaim, that we not only regard highly, but that we worship as the one true idol to worship. That's what we profess, anyway. And the Judas syndrome is all about how we betray our lack of faith in that message and in that person who brought us that message when we don't behave accordingly. That's what it's all about. That's what the inspiration was for. So we are charged to love in that manner. And we're also told, we're also promised that's not only how we change, but how the world changes. We have, I'm so inspired. This is the point that Matthew Kelly was making in his presentation. Thank you, Matthew. It was a great, great inspirational seminar. Go see him if you get a chance. We have the power to change the world. One heart and mind at a time, beginning with our own. No, I'm not saying that we don't have a right to protect ourselves, our freedoms and our our blessings and our good fortune are worth protecting. Our children are worth protecting. And sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes we have to use whatever means we have to ensure our survival. That's the unfortunate truth of things. But ultimately, that's not how we win. That's not how we triumph over evil. You know, when you look at all the world's conflicts and all the intertribal warfare that has gone on for so many years, memories are not short. You know, people remember what was done. Generation after generation remembers what was done to the last. And they carry that hatred and that animosity and those deep scars with them. And we play this game of get back, you know, and it goes on and on. In the Middle East, where these vengeance behaviors have kept that conflict alive for so many generations, that conflict is still alive for all these years. And it's always tit for tat. You know, you assassinate one of ours, we'll assassinate one of yours. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And in the end, no one prospers. No one prospers. You get the illusion sometimes of thinking that you've wielded enough might to win. But in the end, you don't win. In the end, you're more vulnerable than ever. Leading a responsible life involves picking up a real cross and embracing it lovingly. No whining, no complaining, in absolute, utter gratitude, awe, and reverence for all that we have, and doing our part. And quit thinking about what we're owed or what we can get, but what we can give to make this all better. And we're told, this is another thing, we're told, for those of you of the Christian faith out there listening, we're told that if we put that first, everything else will come to us. That's what we're told. How many of us really believe that? And how many of us really live our lives in a way that reflects how deeply we believe it? That's what the Judas syndrome is all about. And I couldn't be happier that it's now published in another language. Maybe I'll have more to report for you at another time about that. We're getting close to out of time. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again for all your support. Visit the blog at manipulative-people.com and counselingresource.com. Avail yourself of the articles. And tune in again next week for another edition of Character Matters. And if you want to join the conversation, feel free to give us a call. Be happy to take your call. And till then, I'm Dr. George Simon, wishing you good night.